Have you ever felt completely invisible in a room full of people, yet painfully exposed at the same time? Jada Thompson walked into the sleek glass-walled office of Hayes Enterprises that morning, her crisp white shirt neatly pressed, her hair tied back in a professional bun, and her folder clutched tightly under her arm. She had spent months preparing for this internship, dreaming of proving herself in a world that rarely gave black women a chance to shine. Richard Hayes, her boss, was already seated at his massive mahogany desk, tapping his expensive watch impatiently, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room like he owned every corner of it. The moment Jada stepped forward to greet him, she felt the weight of his judgmental stare, the kind that pierced straight through confidence and left doubt in its wake. He smirked and said, "Thompson, I hope you're ready to handle real work, because this is not a place for mistakes or excuses." Jada nodded politely, swallowing the lump in her throat, and followed him to the team area where other interns were already quietly working, some whispering and stealing glances at her. Richard Hayes wasted no time humiliating her in front of everyone, pointing out a minor formatting mistake in her first report and rolling his eyes as if the world itself had failed him. Every correction came with a snide remark about how she probably wasn't cut out for this kind of real work. And every glance from him felt like a spotlight highlighting her skin in a room that seemed designed to remind her she was different. Jada took a deep breath, refusing to respond, her calm exterior hiding the storm of hurt and anger brewing inside her. She reminded herself silently that she had worked too hard to let his arrogance shake her determination, but the humiliation strung, and she felt the eyes of her peers on her, some sympathetic, some curious, none brave enough to intervene. As the day dragged on, the insults kept coming, each one sharper than the last, testing her patience, her professionalism, and her sense of self. She finished her tasks meticulously, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the final file on his desk, only to hear him scoff and mutter under his breath that she barely met expectations. Jada's jaw tightened, but she held her head high, knowing she had something that mattered more than his approval. Her family, her dreams, and the quiet strength that had carried her through every obstacle. Little did Richard Hayes know, the moment he chose to humiliate her, he had unknowingly awakened a force far bigger than his ego could ever handle. Marcus Thompson, her older brother and the city's respected police chief, would hear about this, and the consequences of underestimating Jada Thompson were about to ripple through his entire world. Before we move forward, remember to subscribe to stay with us as Jada's journey unfolds, because what happens next will leave you shocked and inspired. Jada Thompson returned to her small apartment that evening, the city lights casting long shadows across the floor as she sank into her worn-out sofa, her mind replaying every humiliating word Richard Hayes had thrown at her that day. She felt a mix of anger, frustration, and disbelief, but most of all, an unshakable determination to prove herself no matter what. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she saw a message from her friend and fellow intern, Maya, asking if she was okay after witnessing the morning's humiliation. Jada typed back a calm reply, pretending she wasn't hurt, but inside her chest felt heavy, each beat echoing the sting of injustice. She remembered her brother Marcus Thompson's words from years ago. Always stand tall, always respond with intelligence and integrity, never let anger control your actions, and protect your dignity. She knew he would be furious if he heard about Richard Hayes' behavior, but she also knew she had to handle this carefully. She could not give him or anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break. That night, she stayed up late reviewing her reports, correcting every detail, perfecting every chart, and preparing for the next day, refusing to let Hayes' arrogance dictate her self-worth. Meanwhile, at Hayes Enterprises, Richard Hayes leaned back in his chair, unaware that his humiliation of Jada Thompson had already begun to spread quietly through the office. Employees whispered in hushed tones, some sympathizing with her, others shaken by his cruelty, but all curious about how long it would take before she finally snapped or gave up. Richard Hayes prided himself on intimidation, but he did not understand that Jada Thompson's calm exterior was a shield, built from years of overcoming obstacles that no one in his privileged world could imagine. The next morning, Jada walked into the office with a new sense of focus, her head held high, every step measured, every glance steady, while Richard Hayes immediately noticed her composed presence and smirked, thinking she would falter under his scrutiny once again. She began her tasks efficiently, her intelligence and skill shining quietly but unmistakably, earning subtle glances of admiration from colleagues who had doubted her just hours ago. As the day unfolded, Richard Hayes' impatience grew. He could sense that Jada was no ordinary intern, that her resilience and quiet confidence were slowly undermining the control he thought he had over the office. At lunch, a small incident occurred when he ordered her to fetch coffee and made a snide remark about how she probably couldn't even read the order properly. But Jada remained composed, delivering it flawlessly and walking away with her head high, leaving a trail of silent tension behind her. Unknown to him, Marcus Thompson had already been called by a colleague who admired Jada's professionalism and had quietly informed him of the day's events. Marcus' protective instincts flared, and he promised himself that he would make sure his sister's dignity was defended, but he also trusted her ability to handle the situation with intelligence and courage. Jada, unaware of how close her brother already was to stepping into her world, continued her day with unwavering determination, turning every insult into fuel for her ambition, every snide remark into a challenge she was ready to overcome. Little did Richard Hayes know that the storm he had casually dismissed in the morning was growing stronger with each passing hour, and very soon, the arrogance that made him feel untouchable would collide with a force he could never anticipate. As the sun dipped below the skyline, painting the office windows with orange hues, Jada Thompson silently promised herself that she would not only survive this internship, but rise above it in a way that no one, not even Richard Hayes, could ever ignore. And for you watching, stay subscribed, because what happens next will expose the truth, test courage, and show that strength and dignity can never be silenced. The following morning, Jada Thompson entered Hayes Enterprises with a quiet determination that made Richard Hayes narrow his eyes, sensing that today would not be as easy for him as he had imagined. And the office seemed to shift slightly under the weight of unspoken tension, every glance from colleagues filled with curiosity and silent support as they waited to see if their intern would crack under pressure or rise above it. And Jada moved with her usual calm, carefully arranging her workstation and checking every detail of her assignments before anyone could notice. Each click of her keyboard, a quiet defiance to the arrogance that had tried to humiliate her, and as Richard Hayes approached, his smirk barely hiding his irritation, he began micromanaging her tasks in front of the team, pointing out minor imperfections with a voice sharp and loud, hoping to shame her once again, but Jada's calm exterior never wavered, her hands steady, her responses polite yet firm, every word demonstrating intelligence that could not be diminished by his privilege, and the whispers around the office grew louder as others began noticing the stark contrast between his entitled cruelty and her quiet competence. And yet the most important element of the day was still hidden. For Marcus Thompson had been called personally by a trusted colleague who had witnessed the morning's humiliation and was already en route to ensure his sister's dignity was protected. And while Jada remained unaware of how close her brother was to stepping into the office, she instinctively felt that the tension around her was building into something greater than ordinary workplace stress, a feeling that sharpened her senses and made every moment feel electric with anticipation. And during a meeting, Richard Hayes publicly criticized her for a minor oversight in a report, suggesting that perhaps she was not ready for serious responsibility. And for the first time, a flicker of doubt appeared in the eyes of other interns who had been silently rooting for her, but Jada remained composed, calmly explaining her reasoning and demonstrating knowledge that Richard Hayes could not refute. And as he sputtered, struggling to regain control, she noticed a new layer of respect forming among the team, a subtle recognition that she was not someone to be underestimated. And at that very moment, the office doors opened, and Marcus Thompson entered, his presence commanding attention immediately, every step deliberate. His uniform and badge shining in the office light, and the room fell into a stunned silence, including Richard Hayes, whose arrogance faltered for the first time as he realized that the sister he had tried to humiliate was not alone. And Marcus' eyes locked on his sister with pride and concern, and without a word, he made it clear that the days of her being disrespected would end. And Richard Hayes suddenly felt a chilling awareness that his actions had consequences far beyond the office walls, a realization that left him uneasy and silent as the office waited for what would come next. And Jada, catching her brother's glance, felt a surge of validation and protection, knowing that she was finally backed by someone who could ensure her dignity was upheld. And even as Richard Hayes struggled to find words, the tension in the room was electric, every heartbeat filled with anticipation for the confrontation that would follow, and the interns whispered to each other, some secretly recording the moment on their phones, sensing history unfolding. And as the day progressed, Jada continued her work with unwavering composure, each completed task a testament to her skill and intelligence, and Richard Hayes realized, painfully, that undermining her had only made her stronger, more confident, and that he had awakened a force far greater than he had ever imagined. And for you watching, subscribe now, because what happens next will shock you, expose the truth, and show that courage, intelligence, and family protection can overcome the most arrogant cruelty. The office felt different now, tense and charged, as Jada Thompson returned to her desk after Marcus Thompson's entrance, her heart still steady but her mind alert, knowing that her brother's presence had shifted the power balance and that Richard Hayes was struggling silently to regain control. And she could see the subtle flicker of uncertainty in his eyes that had never been there before, a crack in his otherwise arrogant demeanor. And as she began her work, carefully reviewing every document and presentation with meticulous attention, colleagues glanced at her with admiration, some even whispering words of support and relief that she was not facing this humiliation alone. And Richard Hayes, feeling the weight of his own arrogance pressing back on him, attempted to assert control by assigning tasks meant to intimidate, but Jada handled each with intelligence and calm efficiency, never raising her voice, never showing frustration, and the more he tried to undermine her, the more obvious it became to everyone that his attempts were failing. And Marcus Thompson quietly observed from across the room, his eyes sharp, scanning the office for any further signs of disrespect, his presence a silent shield around his sister. And each time Richard Hayes attempted a condescending remark, Marcus' steady gaze reminded him that the days of unchecked cruelty were over, and tension built like a storm about to break. Every employee feeling the electricity of what was unfolding, knowing that humiliation had no place in a room under Marcus Thompson's watchful eyes. And as the day progressed, Jada received a complicated project from Richard Hayes, intended to test her patience and skill simultaneously, but she approached it calmly, breaking the work into precise steps, managing time and details flawlessly. And when she presented her completed work, it was flawless, elegant, and undeniable in its quality, and the silence that followed was thick, punctuated only by the soft click of Marcus' pen as he reviewed the results. And Richard Hayes' smirk was gone, replaced by a thin line of tension, a realization that he had misjudged not only Jada Thompson's abilities, but the protective force behind her, and he fumbled through words of critique, unable to sound convincing or threatening, while the interns and staff around them watched, some holding back gasps, others secretly smiling at the subtle justice unfolding. And Jada's composure never wavered, her quiet strength radiating through her every action, proving that resilience and intelligence could withstand arrogance and cruelty. And outside the office, Marcus had already begun quietly gathering reports, statements, and evidence of Richard Hayes' behavior over the past weeks, preparing a formal intervention that would leave no room for dispute, while Jada continued her work, aware that soon the full measure of her dignity would be restored and that her brother's influence would shield her from further degradation. And every completed task felt like a victory, Every glance from colleagues a silent acknowledgement of her strength, and even as the day ended, the tension lingered like smoke in the air, a reminder to Richard Hayes that humiliation could never overpower intelligence, courage, and family loyalty. And as Jada packed her belongings to leave, Marcus approached, his voice calm but firm, telling her that she had done more than survive today. She had sent a message that would not be forgotten. And as they walked toward the exit together, the office buzzing quietly behind them, Jada felt a surge of validation, pride, and hope, knowing that the days ahead would challenge her, but with Marcus by her side, she would face them with unwavering strength. And for you watching, subscribe now, because the next chapters will reveal shocking confrontations, justice, and the ultimate triumph of courage over cruelty.